Hello and welcome to the Rippling Pages. My name is Liam Bishop, and this is the podcast where we craft and curate conversations with the world's most interesting writers to inspire you. Now, America is a place that has compelled countless writers to travel its vast and varied landscapes. Perhaps you've done it yourself, but what happens when you feel compelled to do it all? Again, that's the question at the heart of Joanna Pocock's essay, Greyhound, named after the iconic bus company whose intercity network carries passengers from Detroit to Los Angeles and which Joanna relies on for her own journey. Greyhound revisits familiar motels, crossings, and bus stations Joanna first encountered years before. Along the way, she confronts the grief that sparked her original trip and explores what happens when we allow the road to carry us rather than rushing to control its course. Joanna's writing has appeared in Granta, the Los Angeles Times, The Nation, and the London Review of Books, among others. Greyhound is her second book, published by Fitzcarraldo Editions, like her first book, Surrender, which won the Fitzcarraldo Essay Prize. Joanna, thank you very much for joining me on the Rippling Pages.
Thank you for having me, Liam.
For people who might have read Surrender, and I was saying this before we got recording, actually, you are a writer that I find it hard to place as a city and country writer because you enjoy the wilderness, Surrender's set in Montana, but then you write so well about the cities. Where do you place yourself?
It's very hard to place oneself. I think I am quite a restless person, so I think that's reflected in my writing. Looking back on Surrender, which is, as you say, mainly about Montana and kind of the subcultures of people living very close to the land in Montana, and compare that to Greyhound, which is very much about the road and the kind of unloved spaces, the forecourts and the parking lots and the service stations and so on. I sort of think in a way, Montana Surrender is kind of oh, who's that wonderful photographer, of the vast American Ansel
And Saul
Adams,
Adams, yeah.
whereas Greyhound is sort of like the new topographics, the Lewis Baltzes and the Ed Rusches. And I think in a way they're just two sides of the same thing. They're just looking at the environment. How have we marked the wild places and how have we designed the built places? To me, kind of feel like two sides of the same thing.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, before we get going, let's I'd just like to remember, and if you can, if you're able to like, share, not you, obviously, Joanna. Well, you can if you like. For listeners, please remember to like, share, follow, subscribe, leave a review, or just tell your friends about the show if you enjoy indeed this episode or any other of the episodes. And that's really interesting. And if there's ever a book to start at the start, then this is it. Can you just tell us then about where this journey starts and why?
Yeah. I mean, there's several journeys in the book, and I guess the first one, the inception, was in 2006 when I was sort of, yeah, I had sort of a lot of kind of life bashing me about with, unlucky and just bad things and death, and I was grieving and things were not going well. And one of the things was, I really wanted to have a child and that wasn't happening. And I thought, well, what can I do that I wouldn't have been able to do if I had a baby? And I thought, I know, like I would not be able to take a Greyhound bus across the United States if I had a newborn baby. So why don't I do that? Which sounds in retrospect really weird, but it seemed really normal to me. And so I did that, and at the same time, this sort of fictional character had come to me several months before, and I'd been writing about her, and she was this sort of kind of alter ego in a way, this very kind of, she was an androgynous, kind of sarcastic teenager from small town Ontario, which is where I come from. And then that novel never managed to get published. And then when just before COVID struck, I was thinking, oh, maybe I wonder if that novel that never got published, I wonder if it could work as a nonfiction piece. And I thought maybe I should redo the bus trip and see how it feels as an older woman and see what's changed. And then COVID struck, so I couldn't do the trip. And so what I did was I just absolutely immersed myself in the literature of the road, and I read everything I could find about Greyhound buses, about travel, the classics, on the road, and Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, and then I found lesser known ones, and I became completely obsessed, partly because we were all locked down and we couldn't travel, but so I was doing all this like traveling in my head. And then when lockdown lifted and I thought, wow, well, maybe I can actually, maybe there's something here, these strands of the 2006 trip, the literature of the road, and then I can redo the trip. So I did that in 2023. And so those are kind of the three main strands of Greyhound.
It's interesting because sounds like you're in dialogue with a lot of different, I don't know what the right term, not cells, but entities, and you're in dialogue with the literature of the road because you write about it.
Mm.
What I find interesting that emerged out of that and that emerges in the book is you as a person, and you talk about being a woman and being on the road, and there's not a lot of, comparably, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of literature.
I mean, it's so so I'm shocked by a lot. And in 2006, people kept saying, "Where's your husband?" It was so weird. Like, what do you mean, where's my husband? I mean, it was just a bizarre thing. And then another thing that several people said was, "Oh, when I said, 'Oh, my husband's back in London, he's working and I'm traveling,' like, no biggie to me." But it seemed like a lot of people were quite sort of sort of shocked. And then they'd say, "Oh, he must really trust you." Or they'd say, "Oh, aren't you lucky he gave you permission to?" And it was very strange to me.
And
That
those
when I
conversations weren't happening on your second trip.
Well, they didn't happen in 2023, and I think there's several reasons for that. I think one is more women are traveling on their own, which is great,
Mhm.
as we should be, like, why shouldn't we? But I do think, as a 59-year-old woman, suddenly it's like, oh, well, why wouldn't your husband want you to go? You're beyond your childbearing years. You're no longer a sex pot. You're not sexy. You're not. So there's definitely this vibe that if you're a 59-year-old woman, you're a little bit more like a man. Because
Okay.
you're sort of the things that society values about women, you know, beauty, sex, being objects, and being vessels for babies, no longer applies when you're 59. So I don't think people were so shocked.
And why is the road trip? Why did it become a place for exploring those themes then? Or
Well,
did
that
it emerge out of
happened.
writing it?
Yeah, it just happened accidentally because I'm not a writer who goes looking for something I think I'm going to find. I'm not out to make a point. I'm not out to prove any, like, sort of, I don't have a thesis before setting out. I just set out and I see what I find and I see what emerges. And then I try and craft that into something that I think will be interesting to readers. And that was just one thing of many things that emerged. For me, it's not the most important thing at all. It was just an interesting observation.
And that is the beauty of your essays. You set out from a place, and then I mean, I think to some of the things that you get, that you find in Surrender, the wolf hunting course, is it, and
Wolf
the
trapping, yeah.
wolf trapping, yeah, and the ecological, what they
Oh,
called.
the ecosexuals.
That's it, the ecosexuals, yeah.
Mm,
And then but actually saying that though, because you start off in Canada, Napanee,
yeah.
which is a small town in Canada,
Mhm.
and then you transition over to the border to Detroit.
Yeah.
Did you know that? Well, I guess you knew the route you were taking though this time.
Yeah, so I tried. So the first time I did it in 2006, you could still buy a cross-country Greyhound bus ticket in those days. So, and you could kind of stop off on route, and it was like a flat price. I think it was $230 is what's in my head. I can't remember now exactly. That's all gone now. Routes no longer line up. And I tried to stick to my original route, but I had to do it by buying like individual tickets. And it's really, really different now. But there's always a strain, I don't know. I have a sort of anxiety about crossing borders, which I sort of mentioned a bit in Greyhound, but I think I took a lot of that out because it just felt a bit weird. But that moment of crossing from Canada, from Windsor, which is the sort of border town in Ontario, over to Detroit, and it's a 5 minute drive under a tunnel. Like it's a really short border, but it's such a big deal. And there's something about growing up as a Canadian close to the border with the States. It's a very specific kind of mindset, and it's a very specific, I have a very specific history that I think is probably shared with other Canadians who grew up along the border, that your relationship to the United States is a very intense one.
I thought
Yeah.
you do mention it, and it does feel like quite a symbolic moment
Yeah.
because if you think of the book and if you put on a timeline, the Canada makes up sort of that. Well, nobody can see this, but Canada makes up a very small amount,
Yeah.
and America, but you keep Canada in it, and that's an important choice.
Yeah.
And it does feel like a
Yeah.
transitional moment for the
Yeah.
text.
Yeah. And I think borders are a very important topic today for all kinds of reasons. And now Canadians are being held at the border. They're being deported now. Things have really, really changed. Um, and yeah, I've sort of been grilled at that border many times, and I talk about that actually in Greyhound, going from Canada to into Detroit. And
Well, it sounds like it's something that's sort of stayed with you, but I can see why it would be accentuated in this day and age. So you start the journey
yeah,
and you document it, and you're documenting the history of some of these places as you go along, and some of the literature that references the places that you're in. What I find, I mean, there's so much that's interesting, but one of the things I find really interesting is the people that you meet on the
mm,
journey. And there are so many people still using the Greyhound, still using the buses
yeah.
for loads of different reasons. I don't know if you can talk about some of the people that you meet along the way.
It's a fascinating world, the Greyhound world, and I actually really love being in it. There is a kind of camaraderie there, that you don't get on an airplane. You don't even get it on a train, because it's quite an intensive experience. You're all in this sort of bus together, and you can smell each other, and it's very intimate. Um, and a lot of people are, very much on the kind of margins of society, and really, aren't necessarily there because they want to be there, but because they have no choice. Um, so you definitely see a side of the United States that is rarely talked about or reported upon or inhabited. I don't know why, but well, I love traveling and I love the road, and I don't drive. So if, for me to cross the United States, I have to do it on a Greyhound. Um, I'm often incredibly moved by how it's such an overused word now, the word kind, and it kind of annoys me actually. But um,
Let's just go with it, don't worry.
let's just go with it. I mean, because people are so sort of close to the edge, it's more extraordinary when, they give away their last apple, or they give away their last bag of chips, because they can't afford another one. And you see that kind of thing a lot. And there's one bit that I talk about, when I'm in Amarillo, Texas, and have a conversation with the manager of the Greyhound station there. It's a sort of problematic place for a lot of reasons, but there's a guy sleeping on the seats in the Greyhound station, and the Greyhound station's about to close for the night. And so the manager goes over to this guy. And instead of like going, hey, buddy, like move on, we're closing the station, he like bends down, he squats down so that his face is level with the guy who's sleeping on these seats. And he just speaks incredibly gently to him to wake him up. And he says, you can go get a coffee. I can help you go get a coffee at the Salvation Army. And it's just, he does it with such kindness and sensitivity that I actually brought tears to my eyes, watching that. And you see that so often people not having to be kind and sensitive, but they are. But you also see a lot of horror. I mean, the addiction crisis is so present.
And I mean, there's a lot. There is hope in it. There's a hopeful narrative to it. Partly because of your journey and where you go and what you
Mm.
learn. But there are a lot of people that you see and interact with, and that are at the bottom. They've got
Yeah.
nothing. And then that chap in the bus station manager in Amarillo is a nice example of that kindness.
Yeah.
And you said about the people who give away
Mm,
something, it could be very minimal. And
mm,
the fact that and the way that you spoke about it, the man crouched down and he got his face level, it's bringing him down to that person's level on
right.
the bench, isn't it? It
Yeah.
always seems like there's this search for a perspective, and I don't know if that's what you were looking for or if that's what you found, or if you already had that. But for I really got a sense of perspective, I guess, through
Yeah. I
and all
mean,
these people.
I guess I'm always searching to contextualize things. And um, it's funny because the American edition of Greyhound, they have a memoir on the cover. Um, and I don't think of myself as a memoir. Like, I don't memoir. In my head, I'm not writing memoir. I feel what I'm doing is I'm going out there and I'm observing things and I'm doing research and I'm trying to sort of bring back the reports. Um, and the vessel that is bringing back the reports happens to be me. But that's not the most important thing at all in my writing. I'm not actually that interested in telling my story. It just kind of, it's only there to serve the other stories in a sense. And I guess, yeah, I'm fascinated with why things are the way they are. And it really struck me when I was living in Montana, and because you have people saying, "Oh, it's so beautiful, it's so beautiful," and it is, it's beautiful, and I love Montana, and I still miss it a lot, and I miss the people there and my friends there. But when you really look at it, you do see it isn't just beautiful, it's actually also quite ugly when you look at the toxic legacy of mining, when you look at the treatment of Native Americans, when you look at the greed. And so, how do you contextualize that beauty? Well, you have to bring in the ugliness because that's the story. And I guess that's kind of what I try and do with everything.
What do these people that you meet tell you then about the state of America or the world?
I think the thing with the United States, it's so big, it's so huge, it's impossible to sort of sum it up easily, simply. It's a complicated place, and I do find it endlessly fascinating. What does it tell me? It tells me that there are many, many layers. But this time on the bus trip, I don't know, the phrase that kept coming to me was it's a failed experiment. And I don't mean that to sound sort of, yeah, apocalyptic or whatever, but I think I think one of the things that's so wonderful and beautiful about the United States is that it is kind of an experiment. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, you go from Detroit to St. Louis to Oklahoma to Amarillo to Tulsa to Texas to. I don't know if you go to. Would you go to? You don't go to Texas, do you? Would you
well,
go to
Amarillo's in Texas, but
Amarillo,
it's
Texas? Is
in
it
the
the Panhandle?
Panhandle. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm? Yeah.
yeah. And then finish in Vegas and down to Los Angeles. But just not to go back to that chap too much, but I think that bus station in Amarillo is where he has to go into to the bathroom
Yeah.
and clean it because someone's defecated all over the walls. And is Amarillo also the place where you get the sort of the wind of
Yeah.
excrement essentially sort of sweeping
Fecal
across?
matter. Coming
Yeah, and
out.
it's kind of a symptom, really. It feels like a symptom of what is going on at large and what you're
Yeah.
kind of unavoidable, really. There's an unavoidable sense, and I don't know if this is the something else. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, kind of what hit me in Amarillo. So for people who don't know, I mean, it's where all the cattle feedlots. It's the beef capital. Around that area is the beef capital of the United States, and it's miles of cows in pens being fed and then shitting, and there are these shit lagoons that are just full of cattle waste, their shit, but also all the chemicals that they're fed, and then the chemicals that are used on the feed that the cattle are fed. So it's just, it's an ecological kind of nightmare. And then because it's very dry and dusty and hot, the ground that the cattle are on when they're tramping around with their little hooves, it creates this sort of, it's called fecal dust, and it's toxic, and it's being blown into Amarillo, and you can smell it, and it's making people sick. Um, and the lovely manager, his brother, half brother, I think it was, got a job nearby in I think, is it a turkey sort of abattoir? I can't remember the details now, but it's somewhere that if you're a kind of Islington vegetarian, you'd think, oh my God, how can that person sleep at night working in such a terrible industry? Um, and this is where I think things in general in life get really complicated and interesting and difficult. I am a vegetarian, but I could absolutely not say to a young man living in Amarillo, Texas, how on earth can you sleep at night working in a factory that kills animals in probably not a great way and is part of this whole industry? And I think in a way, this is something that writing can do. It can kind of bridge those gaps or get people thinking about this stuff, because it's not really about whether that guy can sleep at night. It's so much bigger. And that's kind of what I hope I'm doing with my writing, is zooming back and using the act of writing and using perspective to kind of ask those much bigger questions.
Not to focus too much on shit and that,
Mm.
which is something I learned. But yeah, it just felt like you'd reached this point, and it's quite third quarter of the book,
Hmm.
and it felt like you'd reached this place, and it felt very symbolic to some extent.
Yeah.
Like we can't go further without acknowledging, all of this, and that chap you said. I mean that, but that's what you said. That's what you do so skillfully. That sense of balance and that sense of no, there's no judgment within the book. There's obviously you as a person seeing the world from your perspective. There's no judgment, and some of these people are really struggling, aren't they? Well, I tell you what, we might do, Joanna. We might have a quick break on the
Yes.
written pages. But listeners, do come back. We're going to hear more about this amazing journey that Joanna has made twice in Greyhound. This is the time that I like to promote the Rippling Pages bookshop. So it's not a real bookshop, it's all online, and it's provided by bookshop.org.uk, which means all books that you buy from bookshop.org.uk are sourced by indie bookshops. So if you go on there, you can find all the books of the Rippling Pages guests, including Joanna's Greyhound. There's a link in the show notes, and yeah, why not go have a look? Go have a browse. Should we get back into it?
Mhm.
Welcome back to the Rippling Pages. We're here talking about Joanna Pocock's Greyhound. But yeah, there is this. I don't know if this was something you felt so strongly about the first time around. I'm sure it was, but the second time around, and I just find it really interesting that you detail the cost, or you detail the conversations you have about seemingly insignificant costs, about the cost of tickets and the price of taxis. And this felt like a conscious decision, but I don't know if this reflected a wider commentary you're making about the way the world's moving.
I don't make a lot of money. I live on very little. And so that stuff is really important to me. And I guess it's in there because that's just how I am. Like I don't, I don't have money to spend needlessly. Um, and I sometimes get frustrated when I'm reading books where I don't know, where the sort of nitty-gritty of it isn't kind of explained, because it excludes me. And I sort of think, oh, well, it's great they're able to like spend a year in Nepal, learning how to tan yak hides or whatever. Isn't that lovely? But like, how on earth did they manage that? I do kind of want to know. And now with like the whole salt path debacle, I think a lot of stuff does get glossed over when
I
maybe it
do,
shouldn't be.
and I don't know if this is, but yeah, it's about those decisions that you have to make for writing this book, but also
Mm.
what's the benefit? How do you weigh these things up? And I guess I don't know if it is about privilege, but how do we make these decisions about the way we move through the world? And I think
Right.
that's a really interesting thing, and something that the writer in the poem might have to put in too much. But uh, but uh, but this kind of narrative is something you chose to detail and say.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the book is about how do we move through the world. That's a huge, and who is allowed to, who is prevented. And, a lot of what I saw was people being prevented. You don't have a smartphone, you don't have a credit card, you don't have mobile data, you're screwed. Forget it, right? There's loads of places you can't pay with cash. Um, if you're living a cash economy, you're a cleaner or something. Yeah, you're screwed.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and in a way, and that's why this book is so wonderful and so. And I know you said kind, but it captures these things without being this big, broad political statement.
Hmm.
It is through your lens and your experience. And I
Yeah.
think it's for me, it's seeing choices like that of putting that in the book that help us, the reader, see that. But the bus is it's a very political space, especially in America. And you do touch on some of these issues, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I didn't think it would be. I sort of naively just, oh yeah, I'm going to take the Greyhound. But then, of course, when I started writing about it and thinking about it more deeply after the trip, I thought, oh my God, it's not just a locus. It's not just a physical space. It's not just an environment. It's not just a little ecosystem. It's also, yeah, very much. It's a symbol. It's a political symbol in a lot of ways. And it's kind of like, I sort of thought, why haven't more people looked at it like this? Because, the freedom riders, which I talk quite a bit about in the book, and, at one point, in 2000, in my 2006 trip, there's a woman, an African American woman, who actually is talking to the whole bus about lynching, and it's this really it's kind of an extraordinary moment because you realize it wasn't so long ago that this horrific stuff was going on, and the Greyhound bus had a place in all that. Um, so yeah, it's kind of it's almost like a little portal, the Greyhound, into all these different aspects that go right to the heart of what is the United States and how do we move through the world in the United States. How do we do that?
I mean, when you're on the bus, obviously you're writing about it, but when you're on, are you aware? Does it feel like that when you're on the bus?
This time around, what I was sort of permanently conscious of was just how crappy like they're just so dirty, and they're not then you feel like the last thread of the last remnants of a time when it mattered to the powers that be that your average person without a lot of money was still afforded, respect and a means of travel. Like you can feel that no one gives a shit about these people. And no one really cares about how anyone goes from A to B anymore. The sort of the lack of kind of yeah, some dignity afforded to people, like not having water fountains anymore, and toilets just smeared with shit. Like, I mean, it's just what is going on here, and that's what you're very aware of. And yet the people themselves, a lot of them have so much dignity and deserve some.
Yeah, see, it's the second book we've had this year that is about a road trip across America, ironically.
Oh,
Benjamin
interesting.
Marcus, but interesting, the other one was a novel. So that was Benjamin Markovitz's, and that focuses on a wealthy individual driving across America. So I think it was based on Ben's trip in some form.
Oh, I'd love to
Um,
read that. Yeah.
yeah, it's just been nominated for the. I've put it next to you, just behind me there on my
Oh, the
bookshelf. I don't
rest
know if
of
you can
our
see.
lives. Okay.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it's just different, and that is a novel, so it's
Yeah.
fictional, but it is interesting the different things that you pick out to write about. There's a lot of similarity, and what I get a sense of is for you as an individual, and I know this, the political point that's being made, but I think it's important that you get sometimes there's a real sense of, I don't know, serenity would be the right word. It might be a bit too strong, but you see the beauty of this really just ultimately interesting place that compels people over and over and over time, and that's compelled Benjamin, even though he's lived in America for a long time, and this, that you've done, and you've done it again,
Mm.
and that is enduring, isn't it?
It is enduring. And, when I was doing the research, the literary research for it, and the three accounts by women were Simone de Beauvoir's America Day by Day, which was out of print when I wanted it. I had to buy it on eBay. And Irma Kurtz's An American Bus Ride, I think it's called. And then Ethel Mannon's An American Journey. And interestingly, all three of the accounts by women bring in the Greyhound bus. So Simone de Beauvoir, although she was there on a lecture tour and it was all paid for, and a lot of it was done by plane and some of it by train, actually, probably most of it was by train, but she does do some Greyhounding in it. Irma Kurtz, the whole thing is by Greyhound. And Ethel Mannon, same, she had the money to, not take the Greyhound, but she decides to take the Greyhound. And yet all the accounts by men are all in a car driving, individual, driving down the road. Here I am going from east to west, usually, that sort of, not all of them east to west, but a lot of them. Um, Almost like, recreating like the pioneer spirit, which has its problems for me, as well, kind of. But I did wonder, and I don't have the answer to it, but I did wonder why women were so much more interested in doing it on a Greyhound bus. What is that? Is it a safety thing? Like, oh, it's safer if you're with people and you don't have to worry about breaking down on the highway in the middle of the night, or is it something else? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But I thought that was just really, and again, it's not something I've ever heard anyone talk about. So it's quite interesting to me.
Well, it's added to that. It's added another account, which is, and
Mm.
hopefully that inspires others. And maybe you can copyright the term greyhounding as a verb.
Greyhounding.
Yeah, we're not traveling, we are greyhounding. And it
Yeah.
is the Greyhound. The Greyhound is a symbol of American
Yeah, it was a
mobility.
wonderful book, actually. My husband gave me for Christmas when I was in the depths of writing Greyhound. He gave me a book called Hounds of the Road: The History of the Greyhound Bus Company by this guy called, I think he's called Carlton Jackson. And it's wonderful. I mean, I'm such a Greyhound nerd now. But it wasn't always going to be called Greyhound. They were going to call it Bulldog.
Oh wow, that
Because
is
they
a
really
different
liked
mode
the
of
idea
travel.
of like, I know, right? Then
Imagine.
there's all this stuff about sort of,
Oh, that's such a different image.
yeah, and because they're reliable and they're sturdy and but anyway, that didn't last very long. But the whole history of the Greyhound bus is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And of course, when Simone de Beauvoir was doing it in 1947, the buses had little curtains and the stations had, little diners with jukeboxes and lockers and shower. Like it was so, it was quite sort of elegant. Mind you, underneath all that elegance, there was still, segregation.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's sort of, that is also quite interesting, you know?
And it is one of those. Your book is one of those that makes you just want to read. You reference loads of books, yeah, and it's books that aren't in publication anymore, and it's not like you're not an anti kind of. It's not anti men books about the road either, is
No,
it? Because
no.
you're in conversation with them. It's a dialogue with
Yeah.
them, and they are formative to you write very, and On the Road is not a book that I'm
I love On the
super
Road.
super super enamored by, but you write so kind of kindly and gracefully about it, and pick out
I
its
really
challenges
love
and its
that
beauty
book.
as well. So
Mm. And I
um
love Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, which is funny and yeah, no, they're great. And William Lees Teat Moon's Blue Highways is just
hmm,
such a wonderful book. I love that book. So yeah,
amazing.
I mean, it's just such a rich subject. I could write about it for the rest of my life and not be tired of it.
I just wondered, well, I just would like to ask, what is next? Where are you going to take?
I've started my next project, which I'm not really going to talk much about. I think
Okay.
it's going to be very, very different from Greyhound and very different from Surrender.
Oh, okay.
Um, and rather than being a sort of quite a long, involved, meaty narrative, I think it's might be a more episodic book around a subject that I'm becoming a bit obsessed by. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, I can't wait. Listeners can't wait. It's such an interesting coming through the Fitzcarraldo Essay Prize and then writing this book and yeah, well, we can't wait. I'm looking forward
Mm.
to that. But for now, we have Greyhound. Joanna, I've loved this conversation. I've loved your book. I've loved getting to know your work. Greyhound is published by Fitzcarraldo Editions. It's out on the 14th of August. I think by the time this goes out, it will be out now. So I'll say that as well.
Right.
It's out now. But for now, Joanna, thank you so much for joining me on the Rippling Pages.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me, Liam. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.